Oh, it looks like we're live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Publishers Weekly's Books on Tap. You have caught me at the perfect time, coming in right when I lost, and I mean completely lost, my intro text. But welcome to Books on Tap. We are talking today with David Weber and Jacob Holo, the authors of The Valkyrie Protocol. I actually happen to have a big chunky book right here, all 600-ish pages of them. Hey guys, how you doing?
Fine, how are you?
Doing great.
Awesome. I'm better now that I found my intro text. So for everyone who just tuned in, we are talking to Jacob and David today about their book, The Valkyrie Protocol. This event is sponsored by Baen Books, and we're giving away a limited number of signed copies of the book. So if you are the kind of person who wants to read 600 pages of well-researched science fiction with a fast, quick, brilliant plot and lots of actually plagues, which we'll get to in a bit, and time travel, and oh my god, there's so much going on in this book. Enter to win by going to publishersweekly.com/WeberHolo. That's WEBERHOLO. We're not referring to the little cave in West Virginia. We've also dropped a link to the page in the comments section on Facebook and YouTube, so feel free to go link through to it there. This is an interactive event, at least to some extent. So during the event, you, the audience members, can ask questions by writing them in the comment section on Facebook and YouTube, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible after the three of us have our chat, which will be about half hour long. And if you'd like to receive notifications for future events, please sign up at publishersweekly.com/booksontap live. That's Books on Tap Live. So, first question here, without further ado, let's get into our chat. Let's talk about, this is Books on Tap Live. So gentlemen, are you sipping anything this afternoon?
Just coffee in my case.
Just a glass of water from me.
Oh my gosh.
We're boring, I know. We didn't steal our grandmother's sake like somebody else.
It's true. We got to chat a little bit before this, and I have just come back from my grandmother's house, and I realized I didn't have anything in my own liquor cabinet. So here I am drinking a bottle of sake that might have been there since 2003. That's my best guess on the vintage. I'm also drinking a little bit of water, so Jacob, you're in tolerable company at least. So guys, let's get cracking here. We've got 600 pages to chat about in 27 minutes. Let's just talk, actually, probably more like 1,200, because first things first, let's talk about the series. So this is the second book in this series. Why don't the two of you tell us a little bit about it?
Okay, this is a series that I pitched to Jim Baen at the same time that I pitched the Honor Harrington books. That's how long I've wanted to write it. Okay. And Jacob, I invited in to collaborate with it on me because I really liked him. I liked some of his stuff that I had read, and it just felt like he'd be a good fit. And the Gordian Protocol, the first novel in the book, basically sets up the framework for both a time travel and a multi-universal environment for stories going forward. I think that the technology is really, really cool, and Jacob actually got to build most of the tech. We need to get him to talk about that in just a second here. But the crux of the first novel is really the moral responsibility to choose, because one of our characters has to choose whether he is going to be personally responsible for allowing World War II and the Holocaust to happen the way that it happened, because he can avoid that in the universe that he's in. But if he does, 15 universes blow up a couple of 3,000 years down the road. So he has to decide which moral burden he's willing to carry. The history and the societal design is basically mine. The technology is almost entirely Jacob's, and the technology that he came up with for the 30th century in turn shaped a lot about the societies in question. So, Jacob, you want to talk a little bit about the joys of being the techno nerd working with somebody who isn't?
Sure. So one of the things that about working on this series, actually going back to when David proposed it to me, was that I had once sworn that I would never, ever, under any circumstances, write a time travel novel. And then David Weber suggests that we collaborate on a time travel novel together. And of course, I said, yes, David, I think that's a wonderful idea. Let's do that. In terms of developing the two 30th century societies, David provided to me a kind of, you can think of it as like the picture frame, kind of the boundaries that the two societies kind of formed and how they fit into the overall story. And then he said, okay, Jacob, go forth and fill in these picture frames. And I went off to the side and I developed, the societies, in more detail, the technology and how that technology affected the societies. I developed the time travel rule set, which we went through a few iterations of during the development. And I remember when I was working on all that, I thought to myself, I know what David's going to say. I'm going to turn this over to him. He's going to say, okay, Jacob, I like some of this, but you need to tone down the crazy. But he pretty much let me keep all of it.
And it's probably lucky for you, because I'm assuming when you come up with, any kind of time travel mechanics and multiversal mechanics, the prospect of trying to figure out a new way to think of them might be fairly daunting. David, you look like you have a thought on that.
Well, I just wanted to say that Jacob and I both understand that the most important thing is not what your characters can do in a book, it's what they can't do, because that's what structures the problems that they're facing and how they have to deal with it. And one of the things that we both wanted very much going into this was to have some hard and fast rules on how the time travel impacted on the past and what the limits about fixing it could be. And I think we kind of hit the sweet spot there. Although Jacob, there was one point that Jacob wanted to emphasize that we hadn't really hit as hard in the Gordian Protocol as we had wanted to. And it forms a significant aspect of the Valkyrie Protocol, the second book. Jacob, you want to?
Sure. So one of the things that the way this rule set works is that you can go back in time and you can kind of muck around there. You can kidnap famous people. You can quote unquote rescue lost artifacts and bring them back to the 30th century. And at the beginning of the Gordian Protocol, as far as everyone knows, none of this has any effect. So it does have an effect, and you can't change your own past, but you're actually affecting someone else's past, and that the timeline can branch. However, the effect that this has from a kind of a societal resource standpoint is you have what we call temporal replication. So you could have, say, a bunch of time machines that go back a little bit. They grab copies of whatever resource you're interested in replicating. They bring it back to the true present, the 30th century, and suddenly you've got twice as much, and then 4 times as much, and then 8 times as much, and on and on and on. And this is very, very powerful tool to leave in the hands of characters unrestricted. So for me, the kind of initial seed for the Valkyrie protocol was wanting to show some, shall we say, negative consequences for the practice of temporal replication.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead, David.
Yeah, one of the things that is cooked into both of these societies is that they had technological near misses that could have wiped them out in super industrial accidents. Well, actually, in the case of one of them, it was more like Skynet got loose in China. But there are these two advanced time traveling universes in the end, and so far they haven't found any others. And one of the reasons for that is this temporal replication, which is a near miss that doesn't miss in most societies that start fooling with it after they produce time travel. And I think Jacob and I are both optimists, and we are both pro technology. But I think that one of the aspects of these books is that we're both also aware that technology can be a two-edged sword, and so we have been dealing with societies that survived almost fatal mistakes.
Well, I think that's a really interesting thing in general about science fiction. Well, I have a lot of thoughts here. You guys just gave me a lot to work with. One of those thoughts is about the limiting of rules, or limiting what your characters can do. So in my other life, I read about animation. And when you mentioned that, I thought about Chuck Jones's rules for writing The Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. In fact, the first Roadrunner short, he came up with 11 rules to keep him on the straight and narrow, because he knew that animation, like science fiction, can do anything. And if you don't limit what can happen in his case, a 7-minute cartoon, your characters, they lose the path. They get confused. What their character is doesn't necessarily matter anymore. Do you feel like limiting your plot, but also specifically your characters, makes it a little easier to write them in particular, like to write who they are, knowing like what their limitations are?
I think yes, it makes it easier. In some ways, it makes it harder because you've established those limitations. You have to work harder for them to solve a given problem, unless you're going to break the transporter every episode. But it is the fact that a character has to overcome a difficulty, whether it is external to the character and you're looking at the technology they use to affect the environment about them, or whether it's internal to the character and they have to deal with a weakness or a flaw within themselves to accomplish their goals. Having that limitation in there is absolutely critical to producing a character and a storyline that the reader is going to care about.
So it may not necessarily make your job as a writer easier, but it does make the end product tighter.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
It, in some ways, okay, when I build a character, I honestly don't think too much about why a character is doing a specific thing at a specific time, because I know that character. And so I know what that character is going to do given a particular circumstance, a particular stimuli. I don't think through now, what should Raybert do in this case? Raybert, it just goes ahead and does it. And then I have to go from there in the course of the story. I think more goes into building the character initially, and for me, building the character initially and building the character's environment, and then just growing with the character as the character interacts with that environment and it changes them. But I don't spend a lot of time psychoanalyzing them, except maybe after the fact when I finished a book. I'll sit there and go like, oh, wow. Well, I guess the reason that character X did that was Y.
Okay, so a lot of that kind of, I mean, in some ways, it sounds like you read your own story later and discover bits of and pieces about your characters just like a reader would. It's kind of a nice relationship.
Yeah. Well, except that you never want to meet some of them in a dark alley because they'll say, "Oh yeah, you're the one who."
Yeah, I mean, well, the good news is you're only ever going to meet them on a piece of paper, so that's probably best for everyone involved, reader and writer included. So I find the way that the two of you, you mentioned a little bit about your creative process and your working relationship, specifically how you split the book down the line, and I personally would find it really interesting for you to tease that out for us a little bit. Like, what does that look like? So one of you does the science stuff, one of you does a lot of the overarching plot stuff, and you bounce those things back and forth with each other and come up with the book. But how, like, what's the writing process look like for the two of you?
Well, it starts with our having a conference here in my office when we nailed down exactly what we were going to do with the book and tore the entire thing apart and completely redesigned the book in like 2 hours one night.
Oh boy.
But yeah, there is a division of areas of expertise. And essentially, Jacob and I discuss, we plan, we don't outline chapter by chapter. We know essentially what the story arc is going to do. And then on both of the books so far, Jacob has actually produced the first draft. And I have edited and interpolated scenes, especially the ones that are more in my wheelhouse than in his. But Jacob is our first draft writer and the guy who comes up with, okay, this is what we talked about. This is my vision of where we were going with it, and he throws it up for me to look at. And by and large, he's got really good judgment. I've changed course on him maybe twice in both books, and both times it was minor. I've done more with tweaking characters and building scenes to illuminate different aspects of the characters, I think, than anything else. Does that seem accurate to you, Jacob?
Yeah. So the kind of going to how the plots are formed with Gordian, that was very much the kernel, the initial seed of that story was David's, and I think with Valkyrie, at least the kind of initial idea was a bit more mine. Though in both cases, we bounce ideas back and forth, and we did have that one session where we completely tore down our ideas for Valkyrie and rebuilt it in the course of a few hours, which was kind of intimidating because shortly after that, I was going to start working on the first draft and was like, oh, good grief. All my plans, I'm just going to take all my plans and just going to throw them away because I need to start over again. For example, working on Valkyrie, there are a lot of scenes that take place in the Byzantine Empire that deal with historical characters like Samuel Pepys, and these are not my areas of expertise. So even when I'm working on stuff like that, I focus on even though I know it's not going to be the end product, making sure that I'm establishing a strong foundation for when David works on the scene, that he has something solid to work with.
If I don't know where the scene is going, then it's really, really hard to shape the participants' actions. And in this instance, since Jacob is the one who is doing the for want of a better term, the realization of the basic plot that we discussed. He's the one who is setting up the sequences of how the macro events are going to play together. And on the scenes where the historical aspects are concerned, I'm doing sort of the micro mechanics in terms of the overarching plot of the novel, but I'm doing macro in terms of character motivation and who these people are wrapped up in the historical events that they're dealing with.
Let's talk about the historical. Actually, I mean, this is a good combination for me. I'm a medieval history major who grew up reading all of his father's Alfred Bester books when he was like 10. So like you guys got the right viewer. Let's talk about history because I studied medieval history, and the fact that you included multiple medieval or Enlightenment era plagues was fascinating to me for a variety of reasons. Specifically, that at the moment we're all living through a plague, and you started writing a book about a plague before the
way before
the plague happened. Yeah. So let's Samuel Pepys is a great entryway to sort of the things I wanted to talk to you about in terms of this. First of all, how'd you decide on Samuel? Second of all, how did you write his voice? You added like this character from a long time before the period. How did you mesh his work with their work? And thirdly, what was it like? What is it like to release a book somewhat about a pandemic in the middle of a pandemic?
Okay, well, I've always loved Samuel Pepys. I'm a military diplomatic historian with a emphasis on naval history by training, and of course Pepys and his diaries and his relationship to King Charles's navy. It's just like, okay, you gotta meet this guy. He's also one of the most articulate, best recognized voices into a different era. So if you read his diaries, you just get this picture of who he was. Jacob actually crafted the original scenes and interactions between Theodora Beckett and Pepys. I'm the one who crafted specifically Pepys' speech mannerisms and whatnot. Going back in to give him sort of that 17th century feel. But one of the reasons that we chose him was because we were going to be dealing with the plague of Justinian, and he is one of the viewpoints into the Black Death in Western Europe in more recent times, because in the space of 1 year he lived through the outbreak of the Great Plague in London and the Great Fire of London, which made him a particularly emotionally satisfying character to use in the role that we assigned him. Jacob?
Before Samuel Pepys was selected, the outline for what would become the Valkyrie Protocol, when I was working on it, had I'm just paraphrasing myself at this point. Historical person goes back in time with our, the Theodora Beckett and some, other characters from the 30th century to change historical event that David Weber will select. And
you fool.
So that kind of that overall shape was kind of there from an early stage, but in terms of the key players, selecting a historical event, selecting a historical character, I left that to the expert between the two of us.
It's usually best to leave it to the experts.
Yes.
Well,
The same way he'll leave the science to you, right?
Pretty much. It's like I just say, okay, Jacob, and nod. And every so often he calls me back and he says, I misplaced a decimal point. I'm like, it's okay, Jacob. All right. I caught that, but I wasn't going to mention it. I mentioned the fact that in Gordian Protocol, we gave one of our characters an incredible moral quandary.
Mm-hmm.
This book is really and truly, it's about what price redemption, because one of the characters, Theodora in particular, who has discovered that you really can change the past, at least other people's pasts, was a participant she was actually the expedition leader on a mission to retrieve the Great Library of Alexandria. And they killed hundreds of people in Constantinople in the case of taking this library, because they knew that none of this would ever really have happened. Nobody would ever have actually experienced it. And
Sorry, Alexandria? They killed thousands in Alexandria?
They killed thousands in Alexandria. Okay. People who were trying to keep the flying saucers from stealing the library, kind of thing.
Yeah, sure.
And so she discovers that she is this great monster in the history of this universe that's been split off. And she realizes she has all this blood on her hands, and she is desperate for some way to atone. And that is what leads her, after a discussion with Samuel Pepys, who actually is the one who first puts the idea before her, into hitting on the elimination of the Black Death as a way to give life to millions who would otherwise have died or never been born, as a way to cleanse herself, in a sense, of the blood that she unwittingly got on her hands earlier. And then at the very end of the book, she has what I think is in some ways a harder decision to make, which we won't go into, because if we do, you'll understand how the book ends, which would be like a bad thing if you haven't read it yet. Jacob?
Probably.
Well, I think that Theodora's story, from a her arc and her quest for redemption really forms the emotional and moral core to the Valkyrie Protocol, and so much. It doesn't go to plan.
No.
It doesn't go to plan at all.
Well, does it ever, if it's a good plot, though?
Well, Theodora is the closest to a truly Greek tragedy figure that I think I've written in a long time. The person who, well, she's fighting so hard to do the right thing, the moral thing, and the millstones of the gods are after her. And in a way, everything that happens to her is the result of hubris. Okay. But on the other hand, everything that happens to her is the result of being a moral person desperately trying to do the moral thing. And succeeding in doing the moral thing, and yet ultimately failing.
Sure.
Okay.
Making a moral decision, following your ethics to their end point, but finding that the end point is more tragic than you would hope it would be.
I think, yes. I think Eric, sorry. I do a lot of collaboration with Eric Flint too. And I turned 68 this month. That's my excuse. Anyway.
I bet Eric doesn't have the same snappy bones.
Oh, no. But Jacob and I both, when we structure the good guys, the heroic figures, the thing that they have in common is that they are all responsibility takers.
Sure.
Okay, they don't care who created the problem. What they care about is whether or not there's something they can or should be trying to do about it.
Right.
And they're willing to break themselves trying to fix other people's tragedies.
No narrow shoulders among them.
No, not among our heroic characters.
Heroic.
Okay, now there are a lot of other characters that have very narrow shoulders, and some of them have shifty eyes to go with it. I mean,
I have normally when working on a novel, I'm actually rather a little bit sad when you get to the scene where the villain dies, because I enjoy writing antagonists that do bad things for what they feel are good reasons. I think those make for interesting foils for the heroes. But man, I have never been happier to kill off a character than the villain.
We had agreed that he had to have a spectacular demise. Jacob came up with one that was more spectacular than I ever thought he would be giving us here, and I was like, okay, this so works. It's like,
I'm keeping my mouth shut.
Yeah, but you know what we're talking about. And it's specifically, when you think about it, you think about what he was willing to destroy to get where he got, and then you think about the way that he died, and you're going like, oh yes, karma has been served.
That's one of those 11 wily Roadrunner rules, right? At some point, the anvil is just going to drop on you.
Yeah.
Apologies for the doorbell, gentlemen. I do live in an apartment, and the world does continue.
I understand.
So first things first. This is the easiest interview I've done in ages. I'm pretty sure we've gotten through 3 of my questions in 30 minutes. I mean, that's how I like. I might as well. You guys should just do this by yourselves. But we do have a bunch of questions from some of your fans. So let's move on to those, because honestly, they're always going to be more interesting than mine. First things first. Let's start with. Oh God, you know what? There's so many questions for what's next that we should get to that. James Stratton wants to know when the next Safehold book is. Gary Rejzek, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, wants to know when the next Harrington books are coming. So why don't you guys talk about if you're working on anything new, if solo or together. Okay, I'm just going.
Are we working on anything new?
Go ahead. Go wild, guys. Go wild.
Well, Jacob has just handed me the rough draft of the third Gordian novel, which is a different departure from. I told him he can't blow up any more universes for a while.
I followed that rule.
So we didn't blow up in a single universe in this one. This is more of a police procedural kind of a situation. As far as when the next Safehold book is coming out, there's this little problem, which is that it hasn't been written yet. And so it hasn't been scheduled. And that is partly because I am still dealing with the consequences of a concussion I gave myself a few years ago, which is making it difficult for me to do the kind of focused 10-hour writing block that I normally do. That has to be the next project that I write. I have 3 collaborations that are coming through. Eric Flint is putting the finishing touches sometime soon, I hope, onto the next Honorverse book focused on his characters, Anton, Victor Kasha, and company. And I have to do that. I just finally finished the scene that's been hanging up, the next Manticore Ascendant novel from my end that I just had an awful time with, but that is done now. I have the next Star Kingdom novel, rough draft, from Jane Lindskold that I need to deal with. Richard Fox and I are releasing the first novel in a prequel series to In Fury Born, with the building of the Terran Empire. Into the Light, which is my next Tor novel, is coming out, I think, in January. It's a collaboration with Chris Kennedy. And I have an anthology that's been hanging fire for 5 years that I have to do a short story for and get out the door. And I just sent off a short story in Sprague de Camp's Less Darkness Fall universe for an anthology that's coming out. Aside from that, I'm, not doing much, but I'm just,
The slate's pretty light, right, David?
yeah, I mean, no, it's, and I'm doing the collaborations that I'm doing for several reasons, but one of the big ones, and one of the reasons I asked Jacob to write with me, is that I really, really liked some of the stuff that he'd done indie. And I sold my first novel in 1989, so I've been doing this for like 30 years now. And like I tell people, you acquire a skill set in the process of that, but it's perishable. I mean, when you go, it's gone. It's not that I'm saying, oh, wow, I'm getting old, I'm going to be shuffling off any day now, but it's kind of like, if I can find a writer like Jacob, whose work I already like a lot, and I can share some of that tool set with him on the one hand, and on the other hand, I can help him ease into traditional publishing by doing collaborations with a known author, then for me, that's a win-win. But the bottom line is still that I won't do a collaboration unless I'm convinced that the final product will be at least as good as either of the partners would have done alone. In the Manticore Ascendant novels, I specifically wanted Tim Zahn in there as the writer because I've always loved Tim's writing, and I wanted a different voice for the way that those books were shaped to help differentiate them from the Honor time period books. So there are different reasons to do collaborations. I have to say that my partnership with Jacob has been one of the easiest, I think one of the most productive that I've had. And it's partly because our skill sets complement one another so well. But Jacob?
Yeah, I have less to talk about.
I was gonna say, like, I'm worried about my newsletter I gotta get out. Like, I don't know what you get out of here. Like, that puts my life in perspective. Jacob, go.
So David and I are under contract to deliver 3 more books in the series. So 5 total, and that is, like David said, I've turned over the rough draft for book 3 over to him. And that's kind of where my focus lies right now.
Let me say one thing about how this series is very different from most of my series that people are going to be looking at. If you look at the Honor Harrington books, you look at the Safehold books, you look at the Norfresa books, I have a beginning point and an end point in mind for the series before I begin. And I'm writing the books to find out how I get from point A to point B. But there are story strands, plot strands that are threaded through the books that are there in the very first book and are not going to be resolved until the last book. In this case, the books are a series in that they follow upon one another, and each book will incorporate and build upon what happened in the earlier books. But we don't have any set end point. We're not writing to a specific goal. And that means that we have, in many ways, a greater degree of freedom in what we're writing. And it also means that any given book will be a much better entry point into the series than, say, the 9th novel in the Honor Harrington books.
Yeah, I mean, I could sort of speak to that myself. There's, I would say, in the beginning of this book, 2 chapters of trying to catch me up on what happened in Gordian. But otherwise, I mean, if you read science fiction and you know how science fiction operates and the kind of things that you might be able to expect out of some sort of time travel mechanic, you can get in it pretty quickly. It
Yeah.
doesn't take a ton of effort.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's kind of cool. I would note also that in the Publisher's Weekly review of the Gordian Protocol, which was a very favorable review if I remember correctly, it said specifically that that was a standalone. Here we are, the two of you telling me that there are 3 more books in this series. So let none of you viewers ever say that David Weber and Jacob Holo ever let you off without as much as you would like to read.
Well, we try not to. Actually, the reason that the Honor Harrington books were written is that everything that I wrote was spawning sequels. And so Jim Bain suggested to me that maybe it'd be a good idea, like, I don't know, plan a series. And I was like, wow, there's a, pardon the expression, novel idea. And so I pitched 10 story concepts to him, and he picked Honor Harrington. I didn't know he'd been looking for somebody to do a Horatio Hornblower in space for like 20 years when I did it. But Gordian Protocol was one of the ones that I pitched to him. Safehold was one of the ones that I pitched to him. Norfresa was one of the ones that I pitched to him. So I tell people, look, I haven't had an original idea in 30 years.
Look, if it sells books, man. So let's pivot. Let's pivot real quick, because that's actually a really good. That's a really good way into Renee Morgan's question, which is probably judging by our conversation so far, our last question for the afternoon, which is, where do you get your storylines? So how do you come up with your stories? How does all those, you just talked about how you made it, like, how does that happen?
Well, for me, it can, the Mutineer's Moon novels, the Mutineer's Moon, the Armageddon Inheritance, Heirs of Empire. That all started because I was sitting on my front steps one early autumn night, and this huge orange moon came over the horizon, and something in my brain said, what if we didn't have the moon? What if we had a giant alien starship pretending to be the moon? I was like, ooh, shiny. So then I had to figure out why we'd have one, and that built the entire story. I think that I really can't answer the question of where story ideas come from for me. Sometimes it's just, okay, here's a story telling me that it needs to be written, and I wind up writing it. Other times it's I start building a world that I know I'm going to put a story in, and the way I build the world, the furniture that I put into it, suggests to me what the story has to be. Jacob?
So for I sort of touched on this a little bit for the Valkyrie Protocol, where the kind of core idea behind that led to the plot was the idea that we have this temporal replication that we established in the first book, and this is something that in terms of the longevity of the series we need to put hard and fast limits on. And then the story kind of evolved from there. But in a more general sense for me, I'll be like reading something or watching something, and whatever I'm experiencing will make me feel a certain way. And after that, I'll have like a desire to create something that will make someone else have a similar feeling. And a lot of those, a lot of, that kind of then drives me to think about, okay, well, what kind of story could I come up with that would make someone feel the way that I felt when I was, like, say, reading this book?
I think that's a fairly admirable thing to try to do. Yeah. And I am afraid to say, guys, that this is it. We did it. That was 45 minutes.
I want to do one.
Go ahead, David.
I want to throw a plug in for an author I just discovered.
Oh, amazing.
Obviously, she's very successful. I just discovered her the first time. And it's V.E. Schwab. I just finished reading The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue.
New book out, yeah.
Yes, if you haven't read it, you need to read it. I don't usually, do that, but I just thought I would mention it was an extraordinarily good read.
I'm glad you did, and I can second that V.E. Schwab's work is a lot of fun to read.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today, and thank you, the audience, for coming and checking in with us on this lovely book. David Weber, Jacob Holo, The Valkyrie Protocol, 600 pages of action and fun and sci-fi craziness, and really just a brilliantly executed universe. Lots of mechanics going on, really good characters. Go check it out. So this is Books on Tap Live. I'm John Marr, PW's news editor. The next Books on Tap Live event is next Wednesday, October 14th. I'm assuming it's going to be my amazing colleague in the news department, Calvin Reed, because graphic novelist Alex DeCampi and comic artist Erica Henderson are joining us. The two will be discussing their new book that I can't believe I am allowed to say on air, Dracula Motherfucker. Sign up to receive a reminder of the event at publishersweekly.com/booksontap.live. It's a really good thing that the Hays Code doesn't apply to anything anymore, I don't think. Gentlemen, thanks again for joining us, and tune in next time.
Thank you for having us.
That was great.